Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. This is the last part of our One of Us mini-series. Today we are talking to Mr. Chris Piers of Comic Tropes. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out this YouTube channel, highly suggest you go check it out. It is full of well-produced, meticulously researched videos on certain comic book themes, trends, runs, creators. And Chris does a phenomenal job in putting these videos together. He also has a few interviews, like we all do. We are partly in awe of some of the folks he's gotten to talk to, and hopefully you get a lot out of this interview because he is just a great creator himself and really takes a lot of time and searching up all of this comic book history and presenting it to the fans. So without further ado, this is Chris Piers. Very excited to have Chris from Comic Tropes. Chris, how you doing?
Doing all right, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Nice to hear.
As always, we are kicking you off with our first question, which is, how did you first discover comics?
Um, yeah, I guess the first time I came across comics, they were just sort of bought for me on like family road trips and things like that. I don't think that they necessarily resonated in a huge way back then, though. Like I was pretty young, and I had, I know for a fact that I had a Smurfs, a an issue of The Flash, just a random issue of The Flash, a random issue of The Thing from Marvel, and what was the fourth one? Winnie the Pooh from like Dell. So I had those, and but I thought of them more as novelties or like picture books. And then I discovered them sort of for myself when I was in about maybe fifth grade, and I had a paper route, so I had some money, and I saw a spinner rack at the local convenience store. I was really into things like Transformers and GI Joe, so those were sort of the first ones that I bought for myself, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask as a follow-up, do you did you notice the people behind the comics when you first were getting into the stories, or was it really just concentrating on the characters, the stories, the colorful sort of array?
Probably, if I'm being honest, more the latter. Although, I definitely noticed some things once I started buying comics for myself, which was while I was more into the Transformers toy, the G.I. Joe comic just was much better. And later I came to find out that I really liked writer Larry Hama. And then another early one that I started getting because I didn't understand what frequency comics came out in. I was just like, I'd go back at the end of the next week, like I've collected my paper route money, and the same comics were there. And I was like, oh, okay. So I wanted to try something new, and I tried Spider-Man, and it was specifically Craven's Last Hunt. And Mike Zeck's art definitely resonated with me. I was like, oh, some of these comics look really, really good compared to others. But it took me like a year or two to start recognizing the names.
Hmm.
But I definitely noticed a quality difference between things. It wasn't just like, I like this character, so that's going to be the best comic. That wasn't always the case.
Got it. I think it's sort of the same trajectory as a lot of folks. You start to eventually notice, there are people that are making these things, and then you start to notice there are people that are making these things that I like, and there are people that are making these things that I'm like, I can do, I can do without. Um, all right, so before we get into comic tropes, your excellent YouTube show, I found something, and I'm curious about it, which is that were you a former real life superhero that went by
Michael,
the
I had no
moniker
idea this was
Omega?
going to, this is a gotcha
Gotcha
interview.
question.
I'm
Yes,
just kidding.
yes, yes.
No, that is 100% true, and I've even talked about it on my podcast once, or my show, I should say. Yeah, I moved across the country for a job in Seattle, like 14 years ago, and I didn't know anybody here except for one person that I had interviewed on a website that I used to write for, Phoenix Jones, this real life superhero.
Yep.
And so I hung out with him a bit. Also, at that time, I I had been taking Krav Maga for several years, and I was working out a lot. Like I had a personal trainer at night, and every lunch break at work, they had a company gym, and I did the insanity workout, and I did all those three things for like about 2 to 3 years before I moved out. So I was in a lot better shape. I was younger, and I was sort of like, well, maybe I could do this too. And it was interesting. We definitely came across some wild stuff, like, people breaking into cars, people getting hit by cars, fights that would break out, drunk people like being dragged away when they didn't want to be for who knows what, and yeah, a bunch more. Uh, but I also sort of came to feel like, you know what? I don't think in real life you actually need to dress up in the superhero costume. You can just sort of be aware and be present and be a good person without that. There was a part of me that wanted to see, will this inspire people and like, have people like try to do better in their community. Uh, they were very entertained and everybody wanted pictures, but I wouldn't say that I noticed any big changes. So I
Mm.
sort of became disillusioned by the idea, but it was pretty
Understandable.
exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you got into it for the right reasons, not for just, say, like cosplay, sort of fantasy kind of things. You were
No, and
actually, you were actually trying to help.
and in a way, I look at that and I go, well, maybe I was naive. I I sincerely was like, well, maybe I could do good. I don't know. And to be fair, I think I did help several people on certain nights. I did, but I don't think you needed to dress up like that. And I started to become disillusioned because some of the guys that I would patrol with were great. They really were also like really altruistic. But a bunch of them, I think, wanted the attention or were very angry and wanted to get into fights. And we were always sort
Mm,
of like going like, hey, like there was one guy that always wanted to bring like certain knives and stuff. And we were like, you can't. That like we're wearing masks. We talk to the police all the time because, we're helping somebody or other. And if you have knives on you, it's gonna get you in trouble. Like things like that. Or people that would be really quick to pull like a taser and you just be like, it's not necessary.
right.
Um, yeah, so I kind of got really disillusioned with a bunch of the people that I went out with. I just thought that they were like a little chaotic, a little dangerous. So I did it for about a year, and then I was like, yeah, I don't think I need to keep doing this. But I did do it.
Yeah, you did do it. It's out there. I found it.
Yeah, yep, it is.
I don't want to dwell on it, but I do want to just know one thing, which is about
Sure.
your character, as it will, and maybe it was just a name, but did you put a lot of thought and I don't know, work into sort of developing any
I
backstory or anything like that?
Well, not a backstory, because I mean, I was like me. I didn't really have like, a superhero origin. I was just a guy going out there. To the extent I put some thought into it, I, I, by virtue of what's available, I was wearing like, say, an armored, whatchamacallit, motorcycle jacket, which
Hmm.
are almost always like black and stuff. But I wanted some color, so I added like this like bright red satin and stuff. And uh yeah, and it went through some iterations. I had like three or four sort of versions of the costume if you look this up. There's one with like, a hard plastic face mask that people wear for like paintball and airsoft and stuff,
Right.
and that looked cool, but when you're running, it it's a little harder to see out of and stuff. So I did eventually sort of transition more to just like a luchador mask, uh, just for like convenience sake. So there was some thought put into like, you realize that certain things wouldn't work very well as a superhero. Like I've got like, sort of like knee pads and leg armor that is based on stuff that you would wear maybe if you're playing like soccer or lacrosse. But as soon as you start to run, it's very hard to keep that stuff in place. And
Yeah.
so like that stuff just got ditched, like lots of ideas that just got ditched because it just doesn't make sense when you're running.
It's funny you've discovered, these practicalities of
Oh yeah.
superheroing that, are just glossed over. Obviously, it's fantasy in some way in the
Yeah.
books, but it's interesting to hear, what you actually went through and how different it is than what we see in the
It's
comics.
so different. Like, not just like I'm trying to get my thoughts in order. The idea of the visibility reduction with whatever kind of mask you're wearing is one concern, but even the luchador mask, you'd realize like if it was raining really hard that night, because we went out in all sorts of weather. I was like, my God, if you fell into water in this, you'd be waterboarding yourself. And how many stories does say Spider-Man get tossed into the Hudson River or something like that? I'd be like,
Right.
he'd be involuntarily just like choking to death.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild when you put that outfit on and then actually get physical, like how impractical it becomes. You're like, oh, maybe there's a reason why, police and soldiers don't wear certain types of like body armor or costuming. Maybe there's a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. All right, so got disillusioned, did that for about a year.
Yeah.
Assume you're still, collecting, reading comics. When does the idea for comic tropes or just a YouTube show about comics come into your mind?
Uh, there was an inciting incident where basically the job that I had moved across the country for, I'd done that for like about 3 years, and then they massively restructured the company and downsized my department. So I was out of a job. And I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I like to have projects to keep me busy. And so I go, it might take a little while to find my next job. I'm going to create a personal project to fill up that space. That was the idea. I go, what am I going to talk about? The thing I love the most, comics. As far as why I did it on YouTube, I had been doing a audio podcast with friends for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And that was more about like TV. And I would do interviews and stuff with the actors or the writers, and that was fun. I liked having a group of people, but I also saw that it was not super easy to potentially monetize the podcast. And I saw that YouTube, you can pretty quickly start getting ad revenue. So I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'll do it in video. There was also honestly the honest thought that if I occasionally put myself on camera in addition to showing the comics, it could create a little bit of a relationship. I mean, it's like parasocial, but a little bit of a relationship with the audience. They can
Mhm.
see me and they can see how I react to things. So I put some thought into how I was doing it, but it was also very casual thought because I didn't know if it would take off or anything. It was originally just to keep me busy and allow me to talk about something I'm passionate about.
Yeah. And it makes sense to have it on YouTube because you're talking about a visual medium, and
Yes, exactly right.
you certainly, as I talked about before we started recording, more than us, definitely use that to your advantage. You have high production value. You edit your videos very craftily, and so I think you chose the right arena, so to speak. So.
Thank you.
How do you decide? And this is probably a question you've gotten a lot. How do you decide what topics to cover? Did you come into this with kind of a long list of themes and trends and things that comics
No,
have come up with? Yeah.
no. If you go back and watch first 10 episodes or so, very, very loose show. Very loose. I was literally just grabbing comics that I sort of remembered or off the shelf. There was no script. I was sort of like reading what was in the comic and talking about how common that was or what techniques the writer or artist was using. Very, very casual show. It evolved. It evolved, and I hope it continues to evolve because I do think that sometimes people can get a little too locked into what they're doing and not experiment little bits here and there.
Right.
Um, at this point, it's a mix where I've got a pretty big list of topics, either um, comic book history or artists or writers that I'd like to talk about. And I try to also balance that against, well, what have I done lately and what haven't I done? Because I do like to cover the spectrum. It's not just, say, mainstream American superheroes. I'll talk about bande dessinée or manga. I'll talk about old stuff from the golden age. I'll talk about, new and popular stuff too. Which probably isn't smart for the algorithm to like cover that because like honestly, like if you're gonna do a YouTube show about comics, people want Batman and Spider-Man type stuff, and that's fine.
Right.
Some of that I love talking about. But I would get burned out. So I'd sort of do what's interesting to me. So while I've got that list, Michael, I also might have just finished an episode and an idea pops in my head and I go, "Oh, that excites me the most. I'm going to rearrange things." If something pops into my head that I'm really excited about, it just yeah, that goes to the top of the list. It doesn't go to the bottom.
I want to segue into a question I was going to ask later on, but this brings it to the forefront, which
Sure.
is, are there times, and how often does it happen that you may be working on an episode that you're thinking, this is not working, I need to change direction, or oh, I thought of something different and sort of need to scrap your plans or pivot to something else. Is that something that happens often?
Sort of. I don't think I've never scrapped a plan once I've already got a script and I've
Hmm.
recorded. At that point, I'm going to complete it.
Yeah.
Uh, but it would be fair to say that I'm always at different stages of almost the pre-production start stuff where I'm reading the comics or rereading the comics and making notes to myself and reading interviews and stuff like that. So it hasn't quite begun, but I'm gathering the information. I'm usually doing that for two or three ideas at a time.
Okay.
And so like yeah, I have had things that have come close and then I just feel like I don't quite have an angle on it. I know a very early one that I wanted to do that I still haven't done for some reason is I like Norm Brayfogel's art in Batman in the 90s. I like that. And I still haven't made an episode about that. But I had started a script like years ago.
Mm.
And I'm sure I'll do it at some point, but I just sort of felt like not to say that I don't do this, but I noticed that it was very, very just like factual, like this happened, this happened, this happened. And I was like, that's not my goal when I'm looking at somebody. My goal is to maybe find one specific arc or run and look at their techniques through that lens with a little bit of a look forward and backward for how things have evolved to try to tell a little more of a story about that person as compared to just laying out this was the story that was told. And I probably don't always get it right, but in my mind, that's what I'm trying to do. So I have scrapped ideas. Also, sometimes I put ideas off because I get intimidated. Um, if it's time to talk about one of my favorite artists or writers, or somebody that I really respect, it took me like years to do an episode on Wallace Wood. I was just like, oh, I got to do it right. I got to do it right. And it kept becoming like a bigger and bigger thing. And I finally was like, the only way I can talk about Wally Wood is if I break it up into set like about three sections of his life. And I've only done one so far. So sometimes that happens when an
Hmm.
idea presents itself. It's either too intimidating to me because I'm like, I got to get this right. Um, yeah, I don't know. That I'm just in my own head too much probably, but that is stuff that affects the production of my show.
Yeah, for sure. And that's all understandable. I mean, you can't do it all and all at the same time. I'm sure, you obviously you, like many others, including me, like to keep your mind busy and have, more than one thing in the hopper.
Right.
But yeah, yeah, eventually you're gonna get to what you want to get to. And so
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
would
yeah.
be definitely easier on you'll get to Norm. And he's one of my favorites too, as well. And so I'll definitely be there for that one.
Nice.
Um, Research. So you talked a little bit. We've referenced this already, but what does research look like for a typical show? And if you can quantify it about, you know, if you're doing, let's say, a half-hour show about a particular subject, what are the hours that go behind or in front of that
Mm.
show before it's out there?
That's a good question. And that if I knew that before I started my show, how much time each episode takes, it honestly might have prevented me from even getting started. It's good to just like go start a project before you really know how difficult it will be. But now I've got a little bit of momentum and a system, so I keep going because it is a lot of hours. Is what I'm getting at. The reading of the comics and stuff beforehand, like I say, I'm always doing two or three things, so I'm not really counting up that time. I'm just sort of like gathering information to see, do I have enough to put something together? And that's the fun part. I'm just sort of casually, when I can, reading, taking a note if I've got something that I think is an insight. And then it becomes time to do the script itself. And I would say that usually takes me between 1 to 2 full days to like actually write what I want to say for a 15 to 30 minute episode. Um, and in between writing my thoughts, because that's where it like all starts from, is my opinion. I try to supplement that with any relevant interviews or comments on social media from the artist or the community or colleagues, things like that. So that's where I'm sort of like doing some deep dives into uh yeah, just internet history. And all of a sudden I'm pulling up, the these internet databases and the Wayback Machine and stuff like that to find sometimes some pretty hard to find interviews. Uh and then the editing itself, I would say that's the longest part because I'm trying to find a relevant image for each sort of sentence or point that I'm making. And that generally takes somewhere in the vicinity of at least 20 hours to edit, maybe up to 40 hours like of actual time, not just like days. I'm just saying like of actual sitting in front of my computer time. And that's the toughest part for me. I want it to be visual and I want it to be relevant. To find those images when you're talking about somebody's career, and I might be talking about, I don't know, up to 300 issues or something like that. That's the toughest part. That's the toughest part. And it's the reason why I haven't been able to really hire an editor to help me because you'd have to pay top dollar, in my opinion, for somebody that also knows comics really, really well to know where to scan or pull these images from. It's not just like, the transitions and the cuts and the sound balancing and stuff like that. That stuff isn't the hardest, honestly. I kind of like that. It really is picking out the actual images that are gonna work in that moment. That's very time consuming for me. Maybe there are other people that have figured out a better way to do it that I just haven't talked to them yet. But yeah, that's the part that takes a long time.
Yeah, the comic book world is a large world, and if you go back and look at everything that's been published, and I know not every episode is about everything that's been published, but even taking like a fraction of that and trying to distill it into the right images to use during a, 15 to 30 minute episode, that's got to be a
It's a
difficult
lot.
filtering process.
It's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, I remember, I don't think I'd ever keep this broad of a topic again, but I looked at the entire run of Cerebus and how it like changed and stuff. And that's 300 issues.
Yeah.
And I look back and I go, I can't believe I even did that. Like that, not that I was talking about every single individual issue, but I was talking about it from beginning to end. So I was looking back and forth through like 300 issues. That was insane.
Well, you learn, right, on the job,
Yeah.
and maybe that's something, that you come up with a 300 issue run again. I don't know if anybody else has had 300 issues
Oh yeah.
yet.
No, there
Uh,
have been Todd McFarlane on Spawn has
right,
he's
as a
he's
writer,
at
yeah.
least touched one element. Now hasn't done all the writing and all the art the same way
Correct.
Dave Sim did, so that
Yeah,
is different. And there's a lot of examples of manga that have gone there, like
that's true.
Golgo 13, One Piece is pretty famous.
Yeah.
So there are some artists and writers who've assembled at least as many pages. It's pretty mind-blowing. Yeah.
Let's talk about the videos themselves and sort of the
Okay.
approach and the feeling of them. You're trying to get put together these insightful, well-researched, I don't want to call them think pieces, but it makes it sound maybe a little more, I don't know, New
Yeah,
York
I should
Times
have a
than they are.
monocle for that
Right,
and
exactly.
like
Yes,
tweed
yes.
patches on my
Yeah,
elbows and
Atlantic, New Yorker thing. Um, but they are informative, very informative. But you also want to be entertaining, and you're
yeah.
trying to strike a balance between, giving the information and giving your opinion, but also keeping it light and interesting and comedic at least at times, if not
hmm
always. How do you strike that balance, and how long did it take for you to feel like you had struck that balance?
Uh, I'm not sure I always have, to be honest. Because I think if you go back to the earlier episodes when I was very loose, even as I started to develop it, I was very intentionally putting in all sorts of, I don't know, goofy gags, sketches, characters. Uh, because honestly, that's where my mind goes. I like to do humorous stuff. If I wasn't doing some sort of a YouTube show about comics, I'd probably be doing some form of like sketch comedy, but I don't think people really want that on YouTube. There are other things for that, but that's where my mind does go. And after a while, I started to feel like as much as I like doing that, I was doing that for me. And I want to keep it light and funny, but I also want to get to the point of what I'm saying. So some of that has been stripped away just for narrative clarity of an episode. Like I want to talk about my opinions and my observations, and I don't want to slow down the pace by inserting, a character beside me, like Stan Lee or a robot comes in to like say something. Like I enjoy doing that stuff, but I feel it messes with the flow and the
Mhm.
tone a little bit. Because it's like, am I doing a comedy show or am I doing some sort of a critique or a review or something? So sometimes I will still do a funny opening sketch, or I find something silly to do in editing that just really cracks me up, either, sound or a silly image or something like that. Like, because that's where my mind goes. But I honestly, I I have tons of those ideas and I don't allow myself to do them. And I think some people might hear that and go like, "Oh, that's disappointing. I'm missing out on something." It's like, no, it'll show up somewhere, sometime. If you know me in person, I'm much more disorganized in my thinking. But for my show, I've been trying to focus the argument that I'm making and not
Mhm.
distract that with sketch comedy type stuff. Uh, but it's a process, and it's a process where I'm like, okay, but for a big era, I was always doing an opening where I'm doing something silly and I go, "Oh, hi," and there's a weird segue. And I still like to do those, but I feel like it becomes less funny if you fully expect it. So I don't do it every single time. Which I know some people are like, "No, I like that." And I get that, but I also think that like the death of comedy is to fully expect what's coming. Uh,
Agreed.
and so I'm trying to think like, are there other ways that I could insert my humor and it wouldn't mess with the flow? And it's something I'm actually thinking about a lot right now to try to like go like, well, is there a way I can continue to evolve my show? I don't want it to remain too stagnant or too predictable, even if it's comic book analysis. Like what are some ways that I can vary it up? And I don't have that answer right now, but it's legit something I'm thinking of right now is what can I do to just sort of keep things fresh and unexpected while still being the same show.
Yeah.
That's tricky, and I don't have an easy answer. If people are tuning in for that, I don't have an easy answer.
I think that's the struggle as a content developer, which I also don't like to use that phrasing. But
I know there are certain phrases that bother me too, Michael. Like I do call it like the comics industry, but I hate calling it that because that sounds so businesslike, and
yes.
I do see the art in it. So sometimes I'll say the comics field or the world of comics and stuff, but it is also a business, so sometimes I call it the comics industry, but I don't like calling it that. And I
Yes.
don't like calling myself a content creator. And I
Yeah.
never call people my fans. I always just call them my viewers. I can't bring myself to say I have fans. I'm like, I have
Yeah. Yeah.
viewers.
Yeah. I'm with you. And it really, curdles my milk to hear people talk about IP.
I
And
know.
and I think it
Drives me
does for a
nuts.
lot of people too. And so if we can get away from that would be great. Um, but yes, I was going to say that I think as as people that make things, and especially people who make things visually, it is always that balance that is so you're always striving for it, and it always seems just out of reach in terms of giving people what they expect out of something
Yeah.
and yet surprising them at the same time and being able to sort of grow and evolve yourself while being true to sort of the central conceit of whatever you're doing. So, I mean, you see that, I feel like you see that in movies, you see that in TV, you see it in comics, you see it everywhere. And it's just, I think that's kind of the struggle that actually energizes things for those
Yeah.
that are willing to go through it.
I I've intentionally tried to think, what does my audience need, not what do they want. Now,
Hmm.
if I was giving them what they want, I'd probably have 2 million subscribers and have a much cushier life. And I've considered, in some ways, that wouldn't be that hard of a lift. If I wanted to just recap the most popular stories and characters, I'm sure I could do that. I really am. But I also know myself well enough to say that would burn me personally out. Like, I
Hmm.
need to insert something more of myself into this analysis equation. I can't just recap it. Not to say that I don't do too much recap in some of these episodes. I want to give people a foundation to understand my argument, and maybe I overdo too much recap sometimes. I'm open to that criticism potentially, but yeah, I've gone down a train. I'm not sure if that's what you were even asking.
That's okay. It's all good. You've done your share of interviews as
Yeah,
well. Uh,
yeah,
what did you always know that that was going to be part of the show? Is my first question. I have
no,
a number of others.
no, I don't think it was like the goal originally. Anyway, I like doing interviews. First of all, I really like doing interviews. It's one of the things that interests me the most. However, YouTube doesn't like it. Just does not support it. Um, a great example is like last month or something. I did some quick interviews with Daniel Warren Johnson and Robert Kirkman, and I would argue that they're both very popular creators. And even then, like the views for me, like I would consider very, very, very low. Um, so YouTube disincentivizes it to such an extent, and it doesn't just give that episode lower views than what I'd hope for. It then affects your next couple of episodes because
Mm,
they're like, okay, it only got this many views. That means we're only going to share it to that many people, maybe like new people. Um, so these are things you learn that you're sort of battling an algorithm rather than like working hand in hand with it. And that is frustrating because I could probably have a really fun show where I almost do nothing but interviews and I get the insights from the creators themselves. Maybe like bounce some of my opinions off and see if that's an accurate reading or not. But it's not what's going to get the views. So I intentionally have backed way off how many interviews I do. What I do to counteract that is I started a second channel where I do a weekly live stream just riffing on comic book news of the week, giving my quick reviews on the fly of what I've read that week. That's Comic Tropes After Dark, if anyone is curious. And I don't care how many views or how many subscribers that gets. That is designed to allow me to engage with comics on whatever way I want and have fun with it. And I think the audience that finds it also finds that fun. And I'll do interviews sometimes on that weekly show.
Hmm.
And the difference is if I really want to know something, or if it's somebody that's sort of a friend or very friendly, I might still do it on my main channel from time to time. But if somebody's sort of coming to me and they want to promote something, I treat it almost like a late night talk show. Like this is a segment I'm going to have on my show. I'm going to have a guest. We're going to like learn a little bit and we're going to allow them to plug something and then we're going to move on to the next segment. That's how it is in my mind anyway.
Hmm.
And I think that that's fun. I think that that's a an okay compromise. It's an okay compromise, but it means that I'm not reaching out to all sorts of creators that I really admire and I'd love to talk to. There are some channels out there that are doing some fantastic interviews. I think that the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast does a great job with interviewing. I think Direct Edition is also a really good interview channel for comic book creators. There's several out there, and I really admire what they're doing a lot. I would have fun doing that, but I couldn't make ends meet doing that.
Well, as an interview podcast, we totally understand what you're saying.
I'm sure you do. How
The
how?
the the audio version is definitely outperforms for the most part the YouTube. I mean,
Isn't that
YouTube is
strange?
just sort of a I don't know. I want to call it a side project. It depends on who you are. I have to say we have three
Yeah.
co-hosts. I'm definitely on the sort of podcast end. I would just do not have the visuals at all because I'm just a fiend for the audio format. But
I love it. I
one of
listen to
our
audio podcasts
yeah,
whenever I'm like driving, taking a walk.
exactly.
Like
Yeah.
I need something or drawing or something like
Yeah.
that. I
Yep.
audio podcasts are what fuels me at that point.
Yeah.
So I do think that it even though earlier you said, hey, it's a visual medium, so it makes sense. Yeah, but if you're doing interviews
Right.
or it really can still work very, very well, in my opinion, as an audio podcast. And I would probably have a blast doing that personally. I would
Yeah.
have a blast doing that.
I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, we're having a lot of fun here, and we talk to so many different, folks all around the comic world, not the comic industry, and it is a lot of fun. But yeah, it is. I feel like it works better, certainly in the audio format for that particular kind of content.
I
But
get what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, and if you were to look at all of our numbers, you would understand the same thing you understand from yours is that yeah, YouTube definitely disincentivizes um, sort of the one-on-one or even multiple people on one
Yeah.
interviews. It's not what they're, I guess, looking for.
No,
Uh,
and I mean you can even see it if you look at, say, like the late night talk shows do interviews, right? And if they do their like sort of comedy bits or something, those get like lots of views. But Conan O'Brien puts up an interview with somebody, and you're like, oh, this is Conan O'Brien, and this only has, we'll say, 60,000 views. That seems very small for such a big name.
yep.
And he can have like big celebrities. And you just sort of realize, yeah, YouTube definitely has certain things right now anyway that it emphasizes with its algorithm and other things that it disincentivizes. And it's too bad because I know there's a bigger audience out there for what each of us is doing. There definitely is. Um it, and it you have to be very patient to build that audience up through more word of mouth
Yeah.
than trusting the platform that you're on to promote you. It's not really going to help you. It's going to allow you to make some money. It's going to have a big, wide audience you can hit, but you still have to sort of slowly build up the audience that you want to have if you're not going to do what's popular.
Right. Right. How difficult is that, and where does it rank in the challenges of doing a YouTube show, sort of trying to divine
Hmm.
from what you know, the algorithm to sort of, grow your audience?
Well, that's a good question. And, I'm at the point where I, I at least was for several years considering it my main job, but I always kept a day job. And now I'm at the point where it's more of a 50-50 type of a thing because I would say that even though my subscriptions count goes up and occasionally an episode does very well, a bunch of them don't do that well. And so, I go, well, am I doing the show for me? Am I doing it for money? Am I doing it just for the audience's benefit? What is the priority there? And and that's a tough question. I think in some ways I do need to make some changes so that I can at least continue to collect a paycheck. But maybe that's not going to keep happening. I do need to sort of factor that in because I'm getting older, and probably people don't want to look at like a 60-year-old man talk about comics. I don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe as things evolve, that's not going to be a big deal. I feel like right now, if there for music or movies, I think they'd be fine. For comics, it is constantly getting a younger audience, and I don't know if they want to be lectured to or feel like they're being lectured to by an old man. Back in my day, comics were good, and these days they're not. Fortunately, I don't think that.
Yeah,
Anyway, the short answer to your question is it is a concern. It is something where I go, okay, this week I want to do a look at manga from the 1970s that no one's ever heard of. Well, wait a minute. If I put that out, I just did an interview last week. That's gonna be two in a row that is not very friendly. Hmm. Maybe I need to back that up, and I need to do something where I look at a Jack Kirby and Alan Moore, like a more popular name.
yeah.
So I'm trying to balance that out a little bit more with going like, okay, Chris, you like indie stuff, you like old stuff, you like foreign stuff, but you like new stuff too, and you like some of these big names. Like let's work in a few more of those and see if we can actually collect a paycheck. And I don't think that's quite selling out. It's disappointing that it has to be that way because I'd love to just constantly introduce people to new stuff. But there's also new ways to look at old stuff, I'm currently doing one looking at Watchmen. Now, Watchmen has been looked at a million times. It is maybe the comic that's been reviewed the most. I'm not
I
sure.
was gonna say probably.
It probably is, but I still think that I might have an angle that I didn't see anybody else talking about, and I want to talk about it. And maybe the reason it gets reviewed so much is because it's so dense, it's so
Hmm.
deep, and there is stuff to still mine from that, and that's amazing. That's amazing. So I think that that's very likely my next episode. I'm sort of working on three different things at once. Sorry, my cat's yelling. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I usually have a cat or two running behind me or knocking stuff over. Uh, well, let me ask you this. Has Comic Tropes and doing the show changed the way you read comics, especially reading comics just for pure pleasure? Do you find
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
sort of, getting into sort of an analysis mode instead of just being able to let it be just a pleasurable
Sometimes.
experience?
Yes, sorry I talked over you, but the
No, that's
answer
okay.
is sometimes, actually a lot of the times, yes. Which means that on the occasions where I'm reading something and I all of a sudden realize, hey, I'm reading this really fast and I'm not like processing, oh, what was the goal here? Or what's the intention? Or what's this reference to? I'm just enjoying it. I go, oh, like a light bulb goes off in my head. I go, something special's going on here. I'm just enjoying this for the story. for like, calm down, cat. Uh, so yeah, also, I do feel like I have to read my weekly sort of comics that I'll pick up kind of quickly because I'm doing so many things. I've got my job, I'm working on comic tropes. I've still got things that I need to do around the house or spend time with my wife. So it is important that I keep reading comics, but it's almost like I sit down and I just sort of read them in chunks and I go, okay, good, check that off. And I'm enjoying it, but I'm also like, I've carved out time and all I'm doing is just like, I'm just reading it, which just means that yes, when there are those moments that I'm say like I'm reading a comic, some that I've like been excited about lately, just about anything Daniel Warren Johnson does like it gets me excited. I've really been enjoying Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. I'll just be reading these and I go, wow, I'm just getting into and engaging with this story, and I'm not pausing to think about any sort of deeper meaning on the first go around. I go, that's special. That means it's really resonating with me, and I can analyze it later. Let's just keep
Hmm.
enjoying it for now. So there are comics that I'll still like blast through and really, really enjoy, and then there are some that I'm reading in a more critical light, and I go, boy, I bet 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have enjoyed this even more on a certain level,
Hmm.
but I can't turn off that part of my brain. That said, that part of my brain is always on when I'm watching TV or movies as well. And, if I'm watching like anything that has a mystery, I'm going, well, there's a structure here, and like, the criminal would have been introduced in the first act, and we have to play fair with the rules, and you can like sort of figure out where something's going if you understand story structure.
Got it. Yeah. I think it's tough for any of us who do, we only do almost exclusively interviews, so we don't do sort of critiques or criticism or
Yeah.
analysis. But even then, it's still when I'm reading something that is informing, an upcoming interview,
Mm,
I find myself, trying to pay attention more in a more sort of academic way. And then I also try to sort of slap that away and be like, no, enjoy it, just enjoy it. And it's just really tough to do, I think, when you're, part
I
of these
agree.
kind of things. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the goal is trying to be present, like trying to actually enjoy the story for what it is. And if you have those quick impulses of, academic analysis, that's fine. Sort of acknowledge it and try to stay present. Because if you think about it too hard on the first go through, you're I think you're not going to retain that. Like you're going to retain your opinion and your thought in that moment, but the story itself you're not entrusting to your long-term memory. Your brain is making a decision to entrust it only to your short-term memory, the same way as there have been studies on this. If you go on, say, a vacation and you pull out your phone and you're taking pictures of all the beautiful vistas that you're seeing, cool, you've got those great pictures for later. You're not going to necessarily remember that moment as well because your brain is making a decision in that
Right.
moment whether you're filing it long term or short term and letting it go away. Uh, so I do try to just enjoy the story, and then when it's done, I'll have ideally some sort of emotional reaction, and that will inform me whether it's worth further analysis. And I'll try not to be too critical or analytical initially. I try. But of course, this is also how each of our brains are wired, right? So
Yeah.
so we can't help but have some of these observations. I would love to understand how the brain just makes connections and memories come out of nowhere. I don't understand, but yeah.
Oh, maybe that's the next show. Is
Yeah,
is
I'll
trying
have
to
a
find the
psychologist on
yeah,
there or
yeah,
something.
exactly. Um,
That would be
it'd be,
interesting,
it would be
actually.
interesting. Yeah. In terms
Yeah.
of processing. I've actually talked to a number of creators, or this has come up with a number of creators, which is how the comic book reading experience is different than prose reading
Oh yeah,
and different from TV or movie watching. It's its own animal
I agree.
because
I
it
agree.
is not completely leading the reader. You're not just passively taking in the story. You are sort of an active participant because you have those gutters there and in between the panels that you're sort of filling in. So very interesting.
Michael,
Yeah, I
that's my
wonder.
favorite thing to talk about, like with
Oh,
people, like if they're gonna like actually engage and talk about comics is I agree. It's part of what makes it my personal favorite storytelling medium is that it does ask something of you as the reader to put into it because
mhm,
you are filling in that space in the gutters that you're talking about. The gutters is you
right.
uh, and your interpretation of that story. And yet, I think it has the advantages of prose. You can get into a character's head if you want. You can be omniscient. You can be first person. You could be second person, I suppose. I'd have to think really hard about an example of a second person narrative in comics. But anyway, and it has the visuals, the striking visuals that cinema can offer. A great artist can, you know, my God, the work that almost every artist puts into comics, it's insane. Like any one of these individual panels for a great artist could be hanging in a museum. And, like they should be paid like tens or hundreds of thousands for each panel. And instead they're cranking out maybe 22 pages a week, more or less, and taking home a lot less. It's bonkers to think about. It's bonkers. It's such a weird industry.
Yeah, it very much is. Well, that's why there's, plenty of depths to plumb
But I think it
in
also
it.
informs why it's so good is that there has to be a passion behind it. Like almost nobody can be doing this just for the money. Like even the most successful can't be doing it just for the money. They're doing it because they've got a passion to tell a story. And that's to the advantage of us, the readers, if not the most fair. Uh, you know, that's the art world, I guess. The art world
Yeah,
has never been fair.
absolutely. I mean, I think most people, even if they end up, eventually being highly successful and making a lot of money, don't get into comics to make money. They're at
No,
this point,
no.
everybody knows the
Well,
deal.
I think that if there are, I think that they get probably worked out of it just as quickly. They're like, I've got such a good idea. This is my IP. It's going to be adapted into a movie and I'm going to get rich. But if you don't have the passion for getting the actual story out there, you you might get one comic out and then you're just going to be like, "Oh, that didn't make me instantly rich. I'm done." There probably are plenty of people that have done stuff like that.
Yeah,
We just don't hear about them a lot because they don't produce lots and lots of comics.
right.
To produce lots and lots of comics, you really have to love comics.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are some of the tropes or storytelling devices or themes that you love and keep coming back to, even if maybe you can call them overused or, guilty pleasures?
Hmm. Boy, what a challenging question, Michael. I appreciate it. What are some of the ones that I appreciate and like? I would say that I am a big fan of the hero's journey, the story circle where somebody's going to be pushed out of, their comfort zone, face various thresholds that they cross, go about as far as they can from home, get a boon, a gift, a reward that changes them and makes them better. They go through a climax and they come home in some way changed. And I know that sounds very simple in some ways, but I really do think that you can do it even on a monthly comics basis to have a small change for a character. I think there's a book that I really love right now, The Fantastic Four, written by Ryan North. He's been doing it for about 3 years or so. And most of the issues that he's written have been single issue stories where he'll have some sort of sci-fi mystery. And usually it's only like two or three members of the team. Sometimes it's the whole team. It depends. He's focusing each issue on either their relationship or that specific character. And he'll have like a small change for the character that them learn something and change by the end. And I just love how structured it is. So that's one that and I especially admire that when superhero comics that are serialized that have no real planned ending can still tell something that has a beginning, middle, and end, either for an arc or an issue or something. I really do admire that. As I've gotten older, I've gotten less into superhero stuff. I really enjoy, say, crime. I love Brubaker and Phillips. So, like any of the sort of tropes or techniques that they use, where they're laying out what the fundamental mystery is, and you're really getting into that character's mindset of how they're going to try to solve things. That also fascinates me. But there is still something that I love about certain superhero comics when they're done well. Um, and I guess ultimately it all comes down to I love really good structure. Not predictable. It doesn't have to be predictable. I'm just saying that it plays fair and that it ends with some meaning. Even if the character doesn't change, if it changes my perspective, my the reader's thoughts on, oh, this is what actually happened, that's also very cool.
Yeah. There needs to be some movement
Yes,
in the either the narrative or the character that makes
that
things move
justifies it.
forward. Yeah, exactly. Justifies telling the story in the first place. Right.
I don't like it to just be like this cool thing happened, this cool thing happened, this cool thing happened. Like you're like, okay, that's a bunch of stuff, but why?
Why?
And
Right.
and it can still be fun. Like, don't get me wrong. There are like action movies and action comics where I'm like, that's awesome, but there's still something there, like why the character like would never have changed unless they went through this sequence of events, you know?
Makes sense. Okay, I got another one for you. We're in the section of the interview where I'm sort of throwing out like, superlatives. What
Okay.
what do you think is the most surprising thing you've learned in researching a video or a topic?
Oh. Hmm. That's a good challenging one too. Something that I didn't expect to come across when I was doing
Yeah.
the episode. Uh I didn't expect to come across so many unsavory things about Dave Sim when I did my Cerebus episode many years ago. I was really kind of disappointed and grossed out by some of the stuff he's done as a person. Uh, but I had to play fair. When I looked at Wally Wood, I knew that, like, at the end of his life, he was very unhappy. And I'm trying to be like friendly to social media with like words that I'm using here, but he ended himself. And but like then reading about his life, like he was a bit of a misanthrope, I think. That was my takeaway. It sounds like he was kind of an angry person, a lot, not all the time, but a bunch of the time. And that was like a little sad for me to come across. Because he's such a beautiful artist. His art is just so beautiful, but inside. I also thought sometimes yeah, I guess the ones that surprise me are where like somebody has a tragic sort of story.
Hmm.
Fletcher Hanks. Fletcher Hanks did this bizarre comic in the Golden Age called Stardust the Super Wizard, as well as some others. And he was just an absolute miserable person who died alone on a park bench in like the winter. And it's just devastating to like learn some of these things. Don't get me wrong, folks. There's lots of positive, happy, well-adjusted people, But I guess I don't go into these things expecting to find such tragedy all the time. And every once in a while, it does feel tragic. Like there's somebody that's very unhappy. They were doing something creative. They were surrounded by creative, interesting people, but somehow, either the therapy, what options weren't there back then, or they didn't have a safety net of like a close family and friends to sort of help them or guide them. And so those are always sort of the big surprises, not necessarily like, oh, they did this comic too. Those are nice little bits of trivia, I'll call them,
Sure.
but they're not necessarily a surprise.
All
I
right.
gave a nice sad answer.
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
Thanks. Let's okay, we're gonna pick up the energy for the next one, which is weirdest, weirdest, most strange comic trope or theme that you've uncovered.
Probably just how insane a lot of the Golden Age comics are. The ones I grew up like thinking of were the heroes that made it into the modern day. Your Supermans, your Batmans, your Wonder Womans, it's the Spirit, like things like that. But you go back and you're like, okay, comics became very popular very fast in the golden age, very fast. So they created these studios where people would just crank out 8-page stories for anthologies and they'd sell them to the publishers. Like there's this ready-made comic. They just sell to the publisher. Publisher wanted to get that out because it would sell. All they had to do was call it, like Smash Comics, Thrill Comics, whatever comics, Jet
Yeah.
Comics, Funny Comics. And because of that super fast pipeline, there was next to no editorial oversight on an idea. So you have tons of bonkers um, superhero costumes and origins and powers where they're just throwing it at the wall. And if it's stuck, cool, we're going to develop it. And if not, it's forgotten within like 2 to 4 stories. And my absolute favorite was this guy that's it's the comic was called 7-Eleven because that was his prisoner name. And his best friend looks just like him. And he I think he like ran someone over with a car. And he's like, "Don't let me go to jail. My wife's about to have a kid." He's like, "All right, tell you what, I'll go to jail so that you can see the birth of your kid, and then we'll swap places. You'll pay for your crime." But his friend dies somehow, like off panel. And so the guy's in jail. And rather than say, like, hey, by the way, I'm like, the district attorney of the town, this is who I am or something, he stays in jail, digs a tunnel out, and listens to the crimes that are being discussed by the fellow inmates. And at night, he sneaks out, stops the crimes, and then sneaks back in and serves his sentence. And I was like, this is the most bonkers idea ever. No one would do this. But I love it. I love it that he's just willingly serving a prison sentence that is not his.
Only in comics. Yeah.
Only in comics, that's true.
The motivation to get the crime, to keep like us, as busy as possible,
Oh, I know.
solving the crime. Where are you gonna get these cases? Well,
And so,
obviously the prison.
the part of me that likes doing humor will just sort of like I'm constantly reading there's a website comicbookplus.com that archives stuff in the public domain for comics, all the golden age stuff that's been scanned and uploaded. It's all public domain. And I'm always looking for especially weird ones to just have some fun with. Go like, hey, here's who created it. Maybe even here's a cool element of it. But you got to admit, this is crazy. Like the guy, Dynamite Thor is a guy that legit just solves every problem by throwing a stick of dynamite at it. And I love that. He also throws it behind him to explode him forward. That's how he flies. He just tosses dynamite behind
I love
himself.
this. This
And
sounds
and
like
I
an
love
early
that stuff.
Nintendo system game.
Yeah.
Like balloon, was it a balloon hunt or something? Yeah.
I love it.
Crazy.
I love
Yeah,
it.
that's awesome. I will definitely be on what was
Comic
it?
Book
Comic Book
Plus.
Plus. Yeah.
Comicbookplus.com. Great, great resource.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So before we come to a close, I wanted to talk just a little bit about community because, your show has built, a loyal following and a deserved loyal following. What do you enjoy most about having that audience and interacting with them?
Boy, there's so many aspects that I'm grateful and excited for. I guess one of the coolest elements is as it grows, there are extra observations to episodes, things that I sometimes intentionally, but sometimes I just overlooked, like bits of trivia and stories and stuff behind creators in the comments below. So a lot of times YouTube comments you don't really want to filter through because there can be a lot of weird negativity. And I'm not saying that there's not some of that, to be honest, but I just ignore that. I don't delete it or anything unless there's like, a really offensive word or something like that. I just leave it. Um, but my audience, I think you build the audience that you want. And I think I've got a really, really smart and well-informed audience. And I love skimming through lately some of the comments, and there are extra bits of information about a creator or the comic, all sorts of crazy, weird trivia. And so I'm so grateful to like, I think I've like shared everything relevant that I knew about it, and then no, there's more to learn, and I love that. I'm trying to think. There was a recent episode I did. Um, Hold on, what was it? I've got a note for myself because I meant to sort of do like a Patreon update of some of like the thoughts behind it that came from my audience. I can't find it easily right now. But basically there was extra stuff on my Michael Golden episode. Like people had like a couple extra like really interesting bits that I think even rise beyond just being like a trivia item. I was like, "Oh, that's really exciting to learn." So anyway, that's some of the stuff that I like is just sort of reading the comments, and sometimes on social media too. Like you'll get a big response. The um the most recent episode I did at the time of this recording was one on Dan Mora. He's a pretty fun and exciting artist, and there somebody posted my episode on Twitter, and they had like a negative take, like, oh, Dan Mora is overrated. But it started trending. Like lots of people like came back at that and were like, no, 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 like it's too why does comic Twitter hate on artists so quickly when they become popular? Like, and uh, I saw a lot of nice comments, like in response, which was kind of exciting to see so many people go like, no, sometimes when something becomes popular, it's because it resonates.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's exciting to see that.
I'm sure you have some, not to end this on a downer at all, but I'm sure you get some negative comments on
Oh
one
yeah.
hand and critical comments on the other. And there, I'm sure there's some overlaps. There's some negative critical comments and there's some constructive critical comments.
Yeah.
How do you deal with those, and which do you, is it easy to sort of take the good ones and make them useful versus, the bad ones and let it sort of, flop off your back?
Great question. Uh, I think that to to do any sort of a show that you're putting out to the public, you are going to have to build yourself a bit of a shell, and you're going to have to let a lot of the negative stuff slide off your back. What's that phrase? It's not slide off your back. Is it
Yeah, I
like
know. I said
roll off your
flop off
back?
your back. I don't know where I got
Yeah, I don't
that.
know. It's
Um,
whatever. I
Something
can't
off
think
your
of the
back.
metaphor right now. Uh, but it's true because I don't think you gain a lot by arguing with the negativity. And every once in a while, just because it's phrased negatively, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a point. So I don't read every comment. I really can't. Sometimes I'm just not in a good headspace because it will be very personal, people telling me that I'm fat, that I'm stupid, that I should end myself. Um, but if they say like this guy's so stupid, doesn't he know blah blah blah? And I go, okay, sometimes there's a bit of a good opinion in there for either the presentation or the argument I was making. And I try to take that to heart if I see it, you know, like a sensible criticism. I do. Um, I don't read everything for the comments. I mostly just skim for the first day, maybe. Uh, because there's always going to be a bunch of like negative stuff, and it affects me mentally to read too much of it at once. Um, I put a few filters onto my YouTube thing that will just catch really offensive words, and that way that won't get published. YouTube already probably has some of their own that also doesn't allow it. Uh, but if they're just telling me that I'm stupid or I'm fat or I'm ugly, that I don't block or anything. I don't care. Just whatever. You just try to ignore it. Um, anyway, the long and short of it is that I have over the years come to think, okay, one, don't engage. Two, see if they actually do have an argument within that, and then go, do they have a point to that argument? Like, maybe I did do something that I could do better next time.
Right. Right. And I'm sure,
Maybe.
this is hopefully, few and far between. You're getting, you're building a positive community that is
I think
interested
it's
in the
mostly
work you're
positive.
doing. Yeah.
I think it's
And
very positive.
and it's propelling the show forward. Uh, well, Chris, what can we look forward to on the channel coming up in terms of, maybe some of the topics you're going to cover, in terms of maybe a
Yeah.
few of the folks on the side channel that you may be interviewing?
um I think I
If
might
they can be
interview.
revealed, I should say.
Yeah, no, there's some stuff. I think at some point I'm gonna get some time to talk with writer Greg Pak on my Comic Tropes After Dark channel. I did say that I would do that, so I need to organize that. Um, at New York Comic Con, I talked to several people that I also plan on interviewing, like Patrick Horvath from uh, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. I
Hmm.
talked to Wendy and Richard Pini about having them on because they're going to have some sort of a new compilation coming up soon that they want to promote. A couple people like that. I don't have a firm date for any of that yet. That's on my weekly show. And then on my fully edited analysis episodes on my main channel, Comic Tropes, I'm working on, like I was just saying, a special look at Watchmen. Uh, I always do an exclusive episode for my patrons. So right now I'm just giving them like five Predator comics that informed some of the ideas in the most recent movie. And yeah, just reading all sorts of different stuff about like some artists and writers that I'm excited to do on the main shows.
And we're back. Chris, thanks for mixing it up with me. I thought we had a very engaging conversation, sort of dive deep like you do on Comic Tropes into some of the worlds of, podcasting and putting the show together and comic books themselves. So appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck as we do all of our one of us creators that we've had on the program this week. Everybody sign up for West Coast Avengers, Marvel by the Month, Comic Tropes. These are all great shows. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can listen and view them all. And we're part of a big community that I feel like is very supportive of each other and very supportive of this world of comics that we know and love. So that will do it for this episode. That'll do it for this week, our One of Us week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating. Thank you for viewing. Wait, I said viewing already. Reviewing and subscribing. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for everything you do to support our show, Dollar Bin Bandits. Make sure you come back next week. We have a whole new slate of episodes, and then on and on from there. So have a great weekend. We'll see you next issue.